onboarding and, getting them ramped up and, doing their jobs effectively and feeling comfortable, that sort of thing. So this is a good list to use here if you are building out one of these programs and you want to take it beyond that same old orientation. So that is it for Chapter 9. So does anybody have any questions for me on that before we move on to Chapter 10? Are we good? All right. So Chapter 10 is sort of a catch-all. There was a whole lot of stuff going on. They just, the author of your textbook, I think, just whatever was left over, just dumped everything into Chapter 10 here, it looks like. A lot of good information. It jumps around a lot, so bear with me here. We're going to be covering a wide variety of issues here, as you can see by the chapter title alone. Starting with legal issues. Now, a lot of what we do in HR, we're bound by legislation, case law, local law, that sort of thing. We have to be very careful what we do in terms of testing and discrimination and all of that stuff. Training is part of that. Training is in HR, training's in business and industry. So we are bound by the same legislation and case law, so on and so forth, that we, in the back of our minds, we always have to, think about, hey, the legal side of things. Am I doing anything that's going to get me in trouble? And this is where good conversation with your legal department or an understanding of HR law really comes into play. Here are a number of important legal issues that you need to be mindful of. I circled 3 in particular that I want to talk a little bit more about here this evening. Starting with copyrights. This obviously plays a role in your training presentations, that you can't just go on the internet and copy and paste someone else's material. You can't just, take someone's video and show it and sort of present it, I guess you could say, as your own, or sort of claim it as your own, even though people know, you didn't produce this or direct this or start this yourself. There's still that, you have to give credit where credit is due, basically. You have to be very careful with what you borrow, I guess you could say, as part of your training and development activities. And a lot of times with the work I do, I have to write a test publisher or whoever owns a video or those sorts of things to have permission to show this to a class or to present this as part of materials that I'm handing out, that sort of thing. And in most cases, I'd be okay. I'd be on good legal ground, but just to be safe, it doesn't hurt to ask in most cases. You really should. And 99 times out of 100, my experience has been the people are like, yeah, that's okay. That's fine. Just make sure you put my name on it somewhere, or, acknowledge my company or where, that you got this from us. That's all I ask. Simple enough. So you want to be very careful with a lot of proprietary work and even my stuff that I copyright and trademark, what have you, that you can't just take it and start using it yourself. Even though you're not selling it for a profit or anything, doesn't matter. Just the fact that you're using this in some sort of applied way is sometimes problematic. So you want to be very careful with those. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act talks about discrimination, specifically discrimination against the 5 protected classes, as they're called, listed here: race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Other groups are covered in other pieces of legislation, such as age, pregnancy, disabled, what have you. But here, this was one of the first big pieces of legislation that said, hey, we can't do this stuff. We have to treat people fairly. We have to do right by people in the workplace. And these are the groups that we're really going to pay attention to. and that we're going to be mindful that we don't treat them differently from other groups. So those 5 protected classes listed there, very important groups of people. Age Discrimination and Employment Act, enforced as is Title VII by the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, prohibits workplace discrimination against individuals age 40 or over. Now, with these different laws and things I'm talking about here, a lot of times students are like, yeah, I know, when we're hiring, you don't want to discriminate against somebody because of their sex or because of their race or their age. No, all aspects of HR, not just hiring, performance management, compensation, training and development. You got to be careful. Anything related to the workplace, you are bound by these laws. So as a training and development function, we also have to be aware of these different pieces of legislation. ADA, I already mentioned, Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability, there it is, in all employment practices, including training and development. What is a disability? Yeah, the language here, somewhat vague. It's not, I guess you'd say, as crystal clear as some other pieces of legislation as you read them. So according to ADA, disability is any physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, a record of having such an impairment, or being regarded as having such an impairment. Some other terminology, reasonable accommodation. These are changes, modifications you make to the work environment, work materials, access to work, number of different areas here that allow a disabled worker to do their job, perform it effectively, just as you would require any other employee, unless that accommodation would cause what's called an undue hardship. Now, what is an undue hardship? If it is a change, if it's a modification that is going to be very difficult to do, very cumbersome to do, very expensive to do, and this is one of those things you really don't want to put it in the hands of the courts if possible. If there's any way you can make an accommodation, I would do it. I would not want to find myself in court over something that you're like, yeah, we probably should have done something to help this person out here. Again, the language on this is somewhat wishy-washy, and that's kind of by design. The language used throughout ADA, as you talk to different legal scholars, they're under the belief that, you know what, it was written that way on purpose. It's intentionally vague because they want to allow the courts some interpretation of what organizations, if they're trying to get away with something, if they're trying to pull a fast one, if they're doing something that isn't right, they don't want to paint themselves into a corner too much and leave it open to people finding different loopholes and things such as that to discriminate against people with disabilities. So they left a lot of the phrasing wide open to allow for anything that they didn't think about, anything that wasn't on their radar when they were putting this piece of legislation together. And so therefore, a lot of what happens with ADA is done so on a case-by-case basis, open to the court's interpretation. What about diversity training? HR departments do a lot of work in this area. Obviously, diversity inclusion, we've already talked about in this class. Very important topic in business and industry. So let's specifically diversity training. What are the goals of diversity training? There are two big ones. One, to allow employees to contribute to organizational success regardless of their demographics, their physical characteristics, race, age, sex, what have you. Also, as more of a, hey, just getting the word out there, just giving you some more knowledge, sharing information with you to eliminate any sort of prejudices, biases, stereotypes, different ideas that we have toward a certain race, gender, age group, what have you, that impact them, impact their work performance, impact the organization in general. So diversity training typically takes one of two different routes. Again, we've already talked about this in here, but it deserves repetition. In terms of managing a diversity program and kind of outlining the benefits of doing this, the importance to the workplace, listed here. So people say, well, this will be too expensive, or, we don't need this, people won't understand it, that sort of thing. Here you go. Here's some ammunition to use against those arguments. I like using the phrase managing diversity because that's really what it's about. It's an ongoing process. It's a continuous process. It's an organic and always evolving process, and you have to stay on top of it. You can't really let your guard down or just assume, it's taking care of itself, it's fine, don't worry. You always have to be monitoring this. So managing diversity, it's an active process. Creating a climate, a culture, a work environment such that everybody feels accepted, they don't feel discriminated against, they don't feel that they're treated differently, and can do their job, can do their work without interference, without having to worry about those perceptions and stereotypes and how they're going to be treated relative to their peers. The thing is, and we talked about this earlier in the semester, you don't want to do that adherence to legislation approach where you're doing all this diversity stuff so you don't get sued. That is not the way to do this at all. And it drives me insane when I see organizations that do this. That, everyone is a checklist and you count up, okay, how many males, how many female, how many African-American, how many Jewish, how many? No, you don't do it like that. A lot of it comes down to recruiting more than anything else. Cast a wide net recruiting and you're usually good. But to hire somebody on the basis of demographics, those token hires, as they're called, does them a disservice. And I don't care how good these people are. They could be the best employee in your organization. If you manage your HR using this adherence to legislation, in other words, we're trying not to get sued, so that's why we hired you. We hired you because of whatever demographic, not good. And that person, spectacular employee, could be the best employee in the organization, but a number of people will always look at them as, well, you got hired because of who you are, your race, your sex, your age, whatever. And that's unfair to everybody, and that's not right. So you shouldn't, it's distracting, it's wrong. I mean, I could go on and on about this here, but I still, to this day, find a number of organizations that do just that. And I try to caution them, please don't do this for a number of reasons, ethically, legally, whatever. Some still do it. They're so worried about getting sued that every employee to them is check a box and make sure that all the right number of boxes are checked. Not the way to run your HR practices. Managing the diversity program, this has to be a long-term effort. So here are some suggestions. Here are some bullet points for ensuring just that, for maximizing the likelihood that that diversity program is going to be successful. Got to get buy-in from the leadership team, from the employees. It's got to be an ongoing, continuous thing. It can't just be like a flavor of the month sort of thing. Diversity, you have to take a wide angle lens to diversity, not just looking at one facet of diversity. No pun intended, but diversity comes in all shapes, sizes, and colors here. So you have to take a wider view of diversity and what diversity means. In terms of getting employees involved in being part of these diversity teams, getting their feedback, getting their input, that sort of thing, getting their buy-in. This has to be something that everybody feels a part of, everyone understands and appreciates and is on board with. So by doing those things, these diversity programs pretty much become self-sustaining, that they go on and on and on, and everybody sort of polices it themselves. And that's really what you want to have happen. Here again, some other, I guess, some more food for thought related to how you want to manage and sustain any sort of diversity and inclusion program. There we go. A few more for you here. And again, I'm not going to bore you tonight and read these. You can go through these on your own. But this is some really, really good information, stuff that I share with organizations all the time when this topic comes up. Well, as we're talking about diversity, instead of taking that USA view of diversity, well, what about cultural diversity, cross-cultural diversity, and global organizations, those organizations that send people overseas, send people to other countries, bring people from other countries into their organization? That, I mean, talk about a global melting pot here. Training and development departments have a lot to say in regards to that as well. So what do we mean by cross-cultural preparation? It involves educating, training expatriates. So an expatriate is someone who works in a country other than their home country, and their families. That is very, very important. This is oftentimes a package deal. And I've worked with a number of organizations that have left the families out of the equation. And when I ask them about it, they're like, I never really thought about it, but yeah, I guess we should kind of get them involved a little bit as well in terms of the language training, understanding the culture and customs of these foreign countries, that sort of thing. That, this is, all of them are typically going over there together. So to have that support system for the employee and to make not only the employee, but their families feel comfortable overseas, you really have to work with all of them, the entire group, in terms of your training to prep them to go take on an overseas assignment. When you work with global organizations, some of the language that they may use to identify, who's who or where these people are coming from. You have a parent country national, a host country national, and a third country national. So go through these, read about the difference between these three. But sometimes when I work with different global companies, we'll use this language to identify, hey, this is so-and-so from this country, so-and-so. And it helps me kind of understand how all the parts are put together and where to focus some of our cross-cultural training. A national culture then. So let's take a step back from this a little bit and talk about the overall culture of a country. So what is it like living in Japan? How do the people dress? How do they talk? What do they eat? What do they do in their free time? What do they believe in? What's important to them? Now let's compare that to Syria. Now let's compare that to Canada and how those countries are different. So that's the focus here, this national culture. Set of beliefs, values, ideals that the people of a given country have about themselves, the world and their place in it, how they fit into the grand scheme of things. For those global organizations that you might now or in the future find yourself working with, this has a big impact on that organization's success. So this is another one of those areas that me as a consultant, I've run into, where you have a company, let's say you have a US company, they set up shop overseas. So they have a satellite office, they do something overseas. So they expand overseas and they're trying to run their organization the exact same way that they're currently running it in the US. So maybe they're in Japan, let's say, and they're trying to run it the same way. They're like, boy, these people, they're not on board with this. They're not getting it. Our numbers are down. Things aren't working. Geez, I don't know, what's wrong with these people, what their problem is. And a lot of times it's not the people over there, it's you. and you don't understand their culture and their beliefs and what they value and those types of things, when in Rome, you have to sort of adjust and adapt to them, not the other way around. These people, generation after generation after generation, have been raised, have been brought up a certain way, certain belief system. They're not going to change it at the snap of your fingers because you have your, satellite office in their town. It doesn't work like that. They are who they are. So the more that you understand these different countries and specifically the cultures, the more successful you'll be when you do set up offices, set up manufacturing plant, do whatever over there, overseas, because you have to adapt to them, not vice versa. So when we talk about national culture, the person that we have to mention is Geert Hofstede. And I know a lot of people pronounce his name Hofstede, but I saw a presentation that he gave several years ago, and they introduced him as Hofstede. So I'm like, oh, that must be the correct pronunciation of his name. I learned something here. So whether that's true or whether they made a mistake, I'm not sure. But this gentleman shown here spent a big part of his life understanding overseas businesses and understanding cultures and looking at the fit between the two and trying to figure out, okay, what are those facets of these different cultures that are most influential on business success? When you're an outsider coming over to that country, setting up shop, what aspects of that culture, your understanding of those aspects is going to help you succeed? So he is like the guru when it comes to this stuff. He's the big dog in this area of study. So what did good old Geert here find out? He said that when you look at different cultures, there are basically 6 facets that you can use to distinguish one from another. For example, one of those facets is he referred to as a power distance index. Different cultures have different views of power and authority between the haves at the top and the have-nots at the bottom. Some cultures are okay with these big gaps. That, hey, you're a king, you're a prince, you're a dictator, whatever it is, you're in charge. I'm a nobody. I'm nothing. I'm way down here. You're way up here. And I get that. I'm fine with that. Even in the house, the difference between the parent and the child, big gap in terms of who's in charge and who isn't. Social circles, whatever it may be. Other cultures, other countries, that gap is narrowed. And as that gap widens, people get upset. They complain. They say something. They do something. That they try to make that power, make it a little more evenly distributed throughout the culture. So that's the power distance index. So you have to understand when you go to country XYZ, whatever it is, how do they view differences in power? That's going to go a long way toward how you do your training, who should give the training. When you call meetings, who should be invited to those meetings? Even something as silly as who sits across from each other at a boardroom table, things such as that. Who walks into a room first? Who walks into a room last? Some organization or some cultures, well, and then their organizations, that's a big deal. Other organizations, no, it doesn't matter. Who walks into a room first? It doesn't matter. You got to understand the culture. And in some cultures, that does matter. Where I sit at a table, if let's say I'm doing a negotiation with someone across or someone from another country, the person across from me at the table should be at the same hierarchy, same level as me. Not above me, not below me. Very important who sits where. Now, other cultures, other countries, who cares? It doesn't matter. That's what this power distance index is all about. So the more that you understand that, the better you'll be at navigating these choppy waters when it comes to problems associated with this power dynamic. So there's a high PDI for short and a low PDI for short. So I'm not going to go through these. I'll let you read these on your own, just to sort of understand these. I even down below tried to, with the latest research, trying to list the countries that were at either end of the spectrum. So this high power distance index, China, Bangladesh, India, Singapore, Malaysia, and most Arab countries are near the top when you assess this. At the lower end, Austria, Israel, Denmark, New Zealand, Norway, Germany, and the UK. So again, and depending on how much you know about each of these countries and specifics about each of the cultures of these countries, you start to, think that, yeah, I guess that does kind of make sense based on what I know, what I've heard, what I understand about these countries, that, yeah, they do vary on some of these different factors. Individualism versus collectivism. Do we find value in individual success and we prop those people up on a pedestal? Or is it better to sacrifice for the rest of the group, the rest of the team, and we revel in team success? Which is more important to us? And I think I've used this phrase in here before, the me versus the we. With a sports team, do you worry about your own individual stats and, trying to make yourself look good? Or do you, maybe lay down a bunt or, do something to advance the runner to benefit the team, even though it might hurt your individual stats, that sort of thing. So countries obviously vary on this. Some are more individualistic, shown here. Some are more collectivist. Third factor, masculinity versus femininity. Some countries, some cultures have a very clear distinction between what men do, how men behave, how men dress, the kind of jobs that men take, versus women, how women behave, how women are treated, how women dress, what kind of jobs and roles women take, versus other cultures, other countries where, boy, that's blurred a lot. And there isn't a very clear, okay, you do this, you're a male, so you do this, you're a female, you do this. Not so much. In terms of that culture being tougher and competitive and aggressive versus being more tender, more feminine overall. So how do those countries, people, how do they behave? What do they believe in? What is their attitude toward these various topics? So in a masculine culture, listed here, more stereotypes in terms of what men and women do. A number of more masculine cultures listed here versus a more feminine culture, where in terms of, it's okay for a man to cry at a sad event or a sad movie. With jewelry, hey, men, women both can wear pierced ears. It doesn't matter. In terms of their clothing and makeup, and it doesn't. We don't raise that much of a stink over some of the blurred lines between men and women as some other countries do. And that's just not to say that one is better than another. It's just you have to understand that foreign country if you're going to succeed in business over there. And you're not going to be able to change 1 million plus people. You're going to have to be the one to change. You're going to have to be the one to adapt to them. Uncertainty avoidance index, defined as the manner by which a given culture handles ambiguity and how much they worry, they get stressed out about the unknown. That, looking ahead to the future and what the future might bring. Does it worry you? Does it scare you a little bit? Or are you like, no big deal, I'll take it as it gets here? Uncertainty avoidance. So some have a high uncertainty avoidance. Some have a low. So those listed here. Another factor, in terms of how much value they put on the past and learning from the past, looking to the past for answers and celebrating the past, honoring the past, versus, that was in the past. What do I care? I'm worried about today. I'm worried about tomorrow. Looking at the present, future. Screw what happened yesterday. Screw, what happened with my ancestors and everything. I don't need to worry about that. I'm here now. I got to worry about what's happening to me presently. So the value that they put on those different time frames. Cultures vary on that aspect. You can have a short-term orientation, live for the moment, live for today, instant gratification, whatever happens tomorrow. No big deal. More spiritual, normative, nationalistic, time-honored traditions and norms are of great value to these people versus more of a long-term orientation, saving for tomorrow, planning for tomorrow, worrying about tomorrow, being more practical, being more cautious, feeling that, hey, we should adapt, we should evolve with the times. So some of the countries that adopt more of a long-term orientation listed here. Indulgence versus restraint then, in terms of optimism versus pessimism. Enjoyment, again, the word indulgence, being carefree and, nonchalant versus being a little more conservative, being a little more restrained, those types of attitudes. So in an indulgent culture, people have more freedoms. They like to have fun. They're a lot more optimistic about their current lives, about the future, what the future holds for them and their families and friends. They enjoy sports and games and other outside activities. That work-life balance stuff is very important to them. Versus more of a restrained culture, not as happy, little more pessimistic. That you shouldn't have too much fun, or at least show that. That is insulting to other people. That's not a good thing because it's almost like bragging to other people. So you maintain some sense of decorum, some sense of self-control. There are very strict social norms on how you should behave, how you should express yourself, especially as it comes to individuality. So some of the more restrained countries listed here. Finally, just something I found to kind of compare on these 6 factors, 3 very different countries, China, Japan, and the US, on each of these 6 factors, high versus low. Again, not a judgment here, not to say one is better than another, but to emphasize that, hey, you got to understand what each of these countries, what they value, what they believe in. Especially if you're going to do business with them, you have to know what they're all about. You have to have a good sense of their history and their belief system. If not, you are going to fail miserably. You're going to crash and burn. And even worse, if you try to impose your own value system, your own beliefs on them, not a good thing, not a good look. So what do we know about people going overseas? These expatriates that we send to different countries to do a job for several months, if not several years at a time. To be most successful, they have to know how to do their job. They have to be competent. I only want the best performers going overseas. They got enough distractions as it is. So I want to at least be comfortable with the fact that, hey, they know what they're doing on their job. That I can let them be, and I'm not going to have to worry about micromanaging them. They got to have a certain personality to go overseas and live there for an extended period of time. They have to have good communication skills, both verbal and nonverbal communication. And they have to have that get up and go attitude, whereas they're motivated to succeed, to do well. And their family has to have their back. Their family has to support them every step along the way. I can't stress this enough. And I yell it from the mountaintops till I'm blue in the face with all these organizations, and some of them still don't do this stuff. You want somebody overseas for an extended period of time to be successful, they have to have their family support. They have to have their family's buy-in. And one of the best ways to make those families feel comfortable about this is to have them involved at every step along the way. Language training, learning about customs and culture, and helping them in terms of transitioning to finding housing and banking and medical facilities, all of that stuff that you have to do a lot of hand holding. And some organizations think that's not necessary, that's too much micromanaging. I don't think you can do this enough. I mean, speaking from my own experience, I mean, half the countries in this world, you drop me off in the middle of those, I'd probably be dead within a couple weeks here. I'd have a hard time surviving just because I got to know exactly what's going on. You know, you can't just throw someone over there and say, hey, good luck to you, figure it out. You have to give them that support. You have to give them the tools and resources, everything and anything that you can do to help them succeed, to help them feel comfortable and immerse them into that new culture. And obviously there's some countries that it's not that difficult of a change. Like moving from here to Canada wouldn't be all that different. Depending on, some parts of Canada, maybe so, Quebec, Vancouver might be a little different. But for the most part, you're in Canada and you're like, this is a lot like the US. It's not that much different. Other countries that are like night and day compared to the US, yeah, you got to do a lot more work with those folks to make them feel comfortable in their new role as an expatriate. You've heard the phrase ugly Americans, ethnocentrism. This is a problem that a number of organizations face that should be part of that training process. And you see this, unfortunately, with more people from the US than a lot of other countries. It's one thing to be proud of your nationality. Don't get me wrong. Wherever you come from, if you're, German, Polish, what have you, I think by all means you should celebrate that. You should honor your, family and your traditions and where your great-great-grandparents came from, all of that. I think that's a great thing. But when you take it to the point that, yeah, because of my nationality, because of where I'm from, I'm better than you. My language is better than yours. Our food is better than yours. Our customs and culture and traditions and style of dress, you guys suck compared to us. That's where you run into a problem. And I've encountered this a little bit with some folks going overseas where there's this arrogance almost where, hey, I'm from the US, everyone bow down to me sort of thing. And just about every culture doesn't really care. As a matter of fact, some, when they find out you're American, will not be too kind to you, will not want you there. So you got to be very careful about that, to keep that arrogance, that cockiness in check. And a number of the better cross-cultural prep programs talk about this and not having that air of superiority in that foreign country. Not a good thing to display. In terms of training employees for overseas assignments, typically follows a series of 3 steps, 3 phases listed here. Stuff that happens before they leave, when they land there, you still have to keep supporting them, so on site. And then finally, and one of the steps that, again, a number of organizations really drop the ball with, when they come back home, repatriation and getting acclimated again to their old life, their old way of doing things. If you look at, I mean, the military does a pretty good job with this stuff, sending soldiers overseas. Organizations can learn a lot from the way that they prep people to take on foreign assignments. So during the pre-departure phase, again, get the family involved, language training, helping them with amenities, schools, banks, housing, etc. Talking with the leadership team at the organization. Okay, well, once I complete this assignment, what is success going to look like? What is it going to mean to my future career here with the organization? What impact is this going to have? So a very important conversation to have. On site, don't just let these people go and not have any contact with them ever again here. That you have to maintain that line of communication and that support and all those resources. As much as you can get them set up with a mentor, guides, different people who can help ease that transition, will make their lives a whole lot easier and yours as well. Finally, when people come back home, to help transition them back to their old way of doing things. And, depending on where they went and how long they were away for, things might have changed drastically. And you see this with soldiers coming back from war, from people getting out of prison and, coming back home. Now, again, this is apples and oranges, but there are some parallels here. That somebody who goes overseas for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, comes back to Cleveland, they're like shell shocked. They're like, oh my gosh, this is different. Wow, and it's not always a happy thing for them. They finally got overseas. They're comfortable. They got some roots planted, and now uprooting those roots, coming back home, that's difficult for some people. And I've worked with some employees who have done just that, who have gone overseas, come back home. And there was one, I remember telling me this story, that he was in a grocery store, pushing his cart, shopping for groceries, and he had like a panic attack. He was just standing there just crying. And it was just like, he felt lost, that the organization gave him no support when he came back. Like, hey, welcome home. All right, we'll see you at work Monday sort of thing. He's like, that's it. And that sort of thing, that he was kind of left hanging there. And he wanted a little more handholding, a little more, help with the transition back to home life. And a lot of organizations are like, you lived here for years. It's, won't be a problem for you. For some people, it is. For some people, it is difficult. So you have to provide that extra layer of support to those people who are coming back home from especially a lengthy overseas assignment. When people go overseas, they typically experience some degree of culture shock. And this is what it looks like. When they first land, that, wow, this is great. It's almost like a vacation. They're taking pictures, trying all these exotic foods, so on and so forth, that, hey, this is pretty fun. But after a couple months, they start getting homesick, missing their friends and missing their extended family. And, things just aren't the same. You're not as comfortable anymore. And some people fall into a bout of depression, that it gets to be torturous for them. It gets to be very difficult. Typically around month 2, month 3 or so, that the reality of the situation starts hitting home for them, and they might struggle a bit. Now, hopefully, with the organization's support, they get out of that and they get back on track and they become more laser focused. It's like, okay, here I am. I know what I need to do. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to do my best. And, when the project done, when assignment's done, the assignment's done. And I'll go back home after that. But for the time being, I got to do what I got to do and do it as best as I can. So once they get out of that funk, by about months 4, 5, 6 or so, usually they're okay. But the more support, the more help that the organization can provide will help ease this culture shock that pretty much everyone experiences to some degree or another. Top settling in challenges then. So if you ask people going overseas, well, what was most difficult for you? Or what did you need help with the most? Here's the list they provide. Now, I pulled this from HR Magazine. This is from 2005. This is pretty old. And you're probably wondering, wow, Dr. Topper, don't you have anything more recent you can share with us? What are you recycling all these old PowerPoint slides for? I did that intentionally. If you look at this list, all of this still applies today. I don't think anything's changed. Still need to set up your banking. Still need, if you have kids, gotta find schools for them, where you're gonna do your shopping, where your doctor is, where a nearby hospital is, if God forbid you need it, what you're gonna do for fun. I mean, this is gonna apply probably the next 20 years from now. That this is universal. And not just for Americans going overseas, but bringing people overseas to America. And especially here at CSU, a number of international students, I've spoke with a number of them, they said the same thing. Especially if they're going to stay here for an extended period of time, that you need to make a life for yourself. And these are the things that you typically have to worry about. So again, the more that an organization can help with these things, much better off it'll be for everybody. So it's a little after 7. Let's stop here for tonight. I want to give all of you some time to chat with your teammates if you choose to do so at this time. Does anybody have, let me first ask you, have